Hello, and welcome to the sixth episode of Meet an Immigrant. This is my small effort to share the voices of average, everyday people we don't typically hear from in this land of immigrants of ours. Our guest today is Hannah. She's been really generous to give us a window into the life of an Asian American, and I think that's especially important today or these days because of all the hate crimes that are happening. Right? I think it really upset me weeks ago when I saw this rash of elderly Asian people being like shoved to the ground and like with no mercy or compassion, and I'm like, how did we get to this point? But these things start with, interactions between individuals. And so I do want to help you and all of us, myself included, understand what it is to be an Asian American in this country and, get a better grasp of that and see, how can we help and empower them to, feel at home, feel welcome. So without further ado, Hannah, welcome. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, John T. Thank you for having me.
So I do like to start out, since this is Meet an Immigrant, where are you from?
Yeah, it's a loaded question. No, not so loaded. Well, first, I'll preface this by saying it's interesting the show is called Meet an Immigrant because I'm actually not an immigrant. But I'm originally from New York City. I was born and raised in Queens. And yeah, been a proud New Yorker my whole life. So
that's awesome. Yeah. That's awesome. Yeah, New Yorkers are definitely proud of where they're from, and
yes.
It's an awesome place. Incredible. I've lived on and off there for some time, and I have a love-hate relationship with New York City. To be honest, it's an incredible place, but some things can really get under my skin. But we won't get it. That's for another time. So tell us, and now I do like to go into the story of like where our families come from. So Andrew was just here and he explained how his family came in like the 1800s and, where they came from. So who were the brave souls that, kind of made it to these shores and, what was their story like, share that with us.
Yeah. So my grandparents came so my family's originally from South Korea. So my grandparents and my mom and her sisters came over in the 70s. So they came to New York. So they came really, I think, for just the better opportunities here. Korea at the time was not the first world country that a lot of people know it as now. So they came really just to seek, as cliche as it sounds, a better life for them and their family. But yeah, they're also New Yorkers too. I mean, my grandparents know New York pretty well because they've been here. Like they never went back, so they've been here since they came over in the 70s. So yeah.
So where in New York are you from?
Queens.
Yeah. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah. Very cool. And so, what was it like growing up in Queens? Now you actually mentioned to me you're feeling very cognizant of being Asian, even in New York, right? And like even debating the idea of going on public transportation, worried that you might be attacked. So can you compare and contrast this with growing up in Queens? What was that like? Do you have those feelings back then?
Yeah. I think for me, I grew up in a very Asian area, Flushing to be exact, where there's a very large population of Chinese and Koreans and even some, I think there's a couple Southeast Asian communities that also live in Flushing, but predominantly Asian. So I grew up feeling very much not like a minority. Like I went to school with other Asian kids. It was actually pretty diverse. And I didn't know that was kind of an unusual experience as someone who is a person of color in this country, to kind of be surrounded by people who look like you, and not feel that self-consciousness about being who you are. Like I never felt like I wanted to be white. I never felt ashamed of who I was. I never questioned kind of, being Korean or Asian. Like that was just what I was, I mean, racism, sure, it happened. Like, you have like the occasional kid in middle school who just like pulls his eyes back at you or something like that. But it wasn't, at least for me personally. I mean, I won't speak for all Asian Americans who grew up in Queens, but I think I think I can safely say though, like we grew up at least not feeling marginalized. At
That's
least,
great.
being in Queens. Yeah.
No, that's a great thing, and so then, your childhood you spent in Flushing, and so
Mhm.
you had that experience. So how did that change when you went off to college? And where did you go to college, actually, if you don't mind sharing that?
Yeah. I went to Georgetown. That's in Washington. So it was my first time living outside of New York.
Mhm.
And it was a culture shock. Like, I'll be honest with you. It was really the first time I think I experienced that otherness, just
Mm,
not only based on race, but even just based on class.
right.
Queens is a very working class neighborhood, so there were rich kids like I went to school with, but it wasn't
Mhm.
it what I didn't feel such a huge gap between those kids and myself. But when I got
Sure.
to Georgetown, school was like 75% white. Asians were like maybe 10%, and there's obviously a huge class gap as well, between some of the students there and students like me who came from more like lower middle class backgrounds. So it was a huge culture shock.
Mm,
And even within the Asian student body, there was a lot of diversity in there as well. You had like international Asian students
mm,
who were from Asia. Some of them were very privileged. Didn't kind of have like the immigrant sort of story or background. Like, they were almost like white people to me to a degree. And then you had like Asian kids who grew up in cities where they were really the only Asian, and getting to Georgetown was like, that was diversity to them. Like meeting other Asian students for the first time. And then you had people like me who got there and were just like, where the hell do I fit in? um
awesome.
so college was interesting. Yeah, it was definitely
It's
interesting.
cool. Like, so now you're getting, I love the nuance you're getting into, right? So there's not like a monolithic Asian experience, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you have some Asians that grow up, among, a majority white people, and they do feel very different. Whereas you grew up like with other Asians and you felt like, what's the big deal? This is normal. Um, I want to get into a little bit more of that nuance. So I remember when I was in college, in our main dining hall, there would be like a section where all the, Black kids sat, where all the Asian kids sat. And then there'd be another section where like kind of everyone was mixed up. And so can you go into that? Like, how does that happen and why does that look like that? And, yeah, you describe that some
Yeah.
more from your, or if did you have that experience? Maybe you didn't.
Well, for me personally, not so. It definitely was there. Like, if you entered the
Okay.
dining hall, I mean, definitely, like, you tended to see people kind of sat with who they look like. I think
Okay.
that happens honestly even now. Like, if you go to
Okay.
my company's cafeteria, I'm pretty sure that would happen there too. But for me, like, I made friends with a fairly diverse group actually. Like, my friends were white, they were Asian, they were Indian, they were Black. Like, I don't know. I just gravitated towards people who I just liked, and that had
Mhm.
nothing to do with race. And I think that me being from New York had a lot to do with that, because
Mm,
I wasn't there going through like this crisis of like, I need to find other Asians, like I need to find
mm,
other like kids from New York. It wasn't like that for me. I just like gravitated towards people I just thought were cool. So my friendship circle was personally pretty diverse, but
cool.
that segregation definitely does happen. And yeah.
It's interesting. So you mentioned that, like, yeah, if I can imagine that. And even if I felt that when I went to college, right? I grew up in a predominantly very white, area of upstate New York. And so
Mhm.
when I went to college, I met people from around the world. Like, even my roommate was a Korean American guy. And so I love that process of meeting people from different places and getting to know, the diversity, right? And I think that would be really cool. But
Yeah.
like you said, there are those people who really do, this is the first time they're kind of able to interact with people of the same race.
Yeah.
Um, and they're just exploring that, right?
Yeah. I will share actually
Yeah.
an interesting story with you. This just made me remember. But I remember my freshman year, I was like at the bookstore picking up my books, and
Mhm.
I was standing in line, and this girl behind me, who was Korean, she just like struck up a convo with me, and she's like, "Oh, are you a first year?" and blah blah blah. And then she's like, "Oh, what's your what's your like your net ID, which is like how you pull up someone's email address on campus and stuff." And I gave it to her, and she said, she was just like taking notes, and it's like, "Oh, what's that for?" She goes, "Oh, I just want to invite you to like something KSA is doing later." KSA being the Korean Students Association, and it was just like, I realized like it was just one of those things like, oh, did I just get like scouted for something? It was just like she was sort of like spotting who looked like the lost deer in the crowd, and if they looked Korean, like just kind of invite them to like a party that hadn't been marketed on campus. And that was I think when I saw, okay, so I'm supposed to hang out with Korean people. Like that was like my first indication of like, oh, okay, so I guess that's my I mean, I would have gone to the KSA meeting anyway, but I think the idea of like immediately looking for someone who just just, it didn't occur to me that like I only wanted to hang out with Korean people, it's not because I don't want to hang out with Korean people, but I was just like, there's so many different people here, why do we only hang out with our own? I just thought, that was interesting. But that's, yeah.
Yeah. But and on some level, I mean, I think some people, I remember, some people used to get bothered by that, but, I do also understand it. It's like,
yeah, for sure.
If this is, this is for them, it's honestly, it's exploring diversity because they're not used to being with other Koreans, right? Many of them.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
But, okay. So, that was kind of your college experience. And then how about, going off into the real world? Now you're working, how did those, did race play a role in that? Did you feel?
Yeah. So when I graduated, I started working on Wall Street. Like I basically moved back home and, got a finance job, just like every Georgetown grad. And I think more than the race thing, it was just more about trying to understand how corporate America worked. And my being the first person in my family to working in corporate America, this was not something I was, I grew up kind of learning from people in my family or people close to me. And like corporate America is very much a very white centric culture. It's not that it's just there's a lot of white people in it. It's just a lot of things about corporate culture, I think, have a lot to do with the fact that there's just like a lot of white people in corporate America. So in that sense, yeah, I think race did play a role. I was just more concerned about trying to learn as much as I could the minute I got there. I mean, it was everything from the big things to the little things. Little things being like how you just articulated yourself via email. Like there were just ways of talking that like I really had to learn. Like, please advise. Like that's not a natural way to ask somebody to get back to you. Like for me, I'd just be like, just give me a call back. That's not what you say in an email to a managing director. Just little things like that. It was little things to that to bigger things, which is like when you're networking with somebody fairly senior, most likely it's a straight older white male, and they're not gonna come down and meet you at your level. You have to climb up to here to meet them at their level, and so it, from the way you talk to what you talk about to how you position yourself, like there's just so many things, especially I think as a person of color, when you get to corporate America, you find yourself almost covering just to feel accepted. So and if you ask somebody who's like Black who works in corporate America, I'm sure they'll have a lot of things that they can tell you they feel they need to cover when they're working in corporate America. As an Asian American, I definitely felt almost, if there was ever a time in my life where I felt the most pressure to maybe be more American than I was used to, it was probably in corporate America. Like just talking about things that I just, like vacationing in the Hamptons. I've never done that before, but that's just something like senior management just loves to talk about, or like, just things that I don't know. Like, I'm not saying it's all white people, but just things that like rich white people talk about. You just gotta learn it. Yeah,
I love it. That's great. That's great.
Yeah.
And so like, and a big part of, working your way up the ladder, right, in corporate America is networking. So how was that? Did you feel like your race played a role in that, or how did you navigate that situation?
Yeah, I think I think it did to a degree. I think the way it played a role, and also I don't think it was only race. I think it was definitely gender too.
Yeah, I agree.
Which sometimes it's hard to confuse to assume which one it was. But
True.
I think for women of color, it's always like a double whammy. So, um, I I mean, I think where I felt it was, how sometimes you just know when you talk to someone, like you just know there's just not that sense.
Connection.
There's just like a barrier to sort of being able to connect with them. No matter how hard you try, like you're not saying anything wrong. Like you're not you're not doing anything wrong, but you just feel like some kind of you just feel like a natural barrier between you and that person. Um, for me, I just kind of felt like I had better chances of connecting with a senior person who was a person of color than with someone who was white. I mean, I had white mentors too. Don't get me wrong.
Yep.
My manager was white throughout my entire
Yep.
career, and my first boss, actually, he was wonderful, like really great guy. It never made me feel like small in any way. But if I was networking with other people, like you just instinctively feel it, and there's just nothing you can do about it. You just kind of know the relationship is going to always be at a certain point. Like there's just a line you can't cross no matter what you do. And I think it also comes from the fact, I mean, I don't want to generalize about all white people, but I do feel like the dynamic is always one in which they just kind of expect you, if you're the minority, to like meet them where they're at. Like they don't try as hard as you do to try to like meet in the middle, whether you're talking about something or when you're trying to find relatability. I always feel like it's the person of color who has to try harder to meet the white person at their point of understanding, and it's not, I don't see as much effort being put in as like the white person. That's not all white people. I'm not saying it's all white people, but for the folks,
and that's, I understand. Yeah, you're not trying to condemn people, but just like, look, from your perspective, this is how you felt, living in like a white man's world, right? For lack of a better phrase, right? And like, it's not the same, right? There is a difference, right? If you do not share the same experiences, then it's harder to have those conversations, which would allow you to connect on a deeper level, and which may lead to career advancement. Exactly. And it's not going to be all white people. It's just going to be some. And unfortunately, sometimes those are the people that do have control over your ability to advance or not.
Exactly.
What I liked, actually, you shared something interesting, is like, well, you just didn't take it and just accept that. You've tried to find another way. So you want to, kind of go into some details about what you did to kind of.
Yeah. So I got involved with so I won't name the company I was at, but we had an Asian affinity network there, which at the time was only for folks in IT. And I wasn't in IT. I was part of the business. And myself and another Asian American woman who was around my age, we noticed that there was, a Black professionals network, there's a Latino professionals network, but there was no firm-wide Asian professionals network. And when we went to HR about it, they were literally like, there's one in IT. And we were sort of like, but we're not in IT. And it just blew my mind that they really didn't think that was a problem. Like, and there's tons of Asians here, but no one seemed to have said anything. So we really pushed for a firm-wide Asian professionals network. And it was a really interesting experience for me because a lot of folks who headed up the IT version of the Asian professionals network became the heads of the firm-wide one. And, nothing against people in IT, but I think they were just used to having done their own events a certain way where, like, the network got a budget every May for Asian Heritage Month, and it was always like Chinese ribbon dancing and like dumpling making classes, which is fine. Yeah. But myself and the girl and a bunch of other people in the business said, we have a real opportunity here to actually educate people at the firm things that we as Asian employees go through. We can bring speakers here. We can do diversity trainings. We could talk more about the bamboo ceiling, which is the Asian version of the glass ceiling. So we really pushed for those events. And the first event, I actually helped co-organize and I moderated. We brought two local politicians in who are of Asian descent to the firm. And we moderated a panel to talk about the racism that they faced and the pressures that they faced, being the only, local New York State, assembly person and congresswoman. I probably just gave them away by that description, but but being the only Asian politicians at the time, their particular experience, and it really resonated with. We got like 200 people who showed up to that event, and it was the first time looking out at the audience where I saw these, people in their 40s and 50s, like Asian people who worked in IT and finance and equities and whatever, where I kind of saw it in their faces, like they really felt seen. I think for the first time ever in their working life, and they didn't even know that they were missing that, and it was really powerful. And I was really, it was a lot of work, but I was really grateful to have, helped with that at the firm. And
That's powerful. No, that's great. And I love how you just didn't accept the reality the way it was. You really tried to change things. Right. And I see that in so many different aspects of life. Like the people who do just like a little extra step, you can really not just benefit yourself, but so many people. And so, my respects to you for taking that step.
Thanks.
And how about other friends? Like, did you chat with other friends and what their experiences were? I mean, do you have any other kind of stories that, kind of over the years you heard, different things happening and like, what, this is not acceptable. Really, this shouldn't be happening in this day and age. Maybe that you'd like to share?
In corporate America or like about
corporate America, schooling, just life in general, honestly, like, kind of insights into, what it's like being an Asian in, in the workplace or in school or, even on the streets,
I mean, I think for my friends, I mean, I think we've experienced it in various levels. I think we all have had some form of, experience with, very public racism, like ignorant racism. Like I myself was like, I think 2 months ago, I was right outside Penn Station and some guy just like, he was mentally ill, but he followed me just screaming Chinese bitch at me for three blocks. Like he just saw me and he just started like, that's actually never happened to me before. And this is Penn Station. And he just kept screaming things like Chinese bitch. Like he goes, I'm going to turn you into wonton soup. Like go back to where the fuck you came from. And like, I didn't say anything back because like the last thing I wanted to do was escalate into something. And I didn't know if he had a weapon. But the thing that pissed me off more than anything was the fact that nobody said anything. Like there were a lot of people there and they all clearly heard, like he was screaming it at the top of his lungs and like no one did anything. And I was like, okay, that's what it feels like to be Asian in America. Like no one gives a shit about you. Like when you're literally being racially taunted on the street.
Really horrible.
So yeah, I think we've all had that sort of experience.
It's funny. I recently met somebody who's Japanese American, and her family's been here for a long time, like longer than my family's been here. They like even her I think it was her grandparents that were in the internment camps in Utah, I think. And she was telling me that she was one of these beach communities here in Southern California in a store. And all of a sudden, some white lady just started yelling at her and accusing her of, you Chinese this, Chinese that, get out of here, and like you said, it's just not right. I mean, to think about like the wrongs that her family, endured, maybe even by the ancestors of that lady, if anybody should be upset here, and it's really a shame, but she dealt with it with dignity and she stayed calm. And like you said, didn't escalate the situation, but it's hurtful when, other people don't come in to help you, a woman, a man chasing a woman down the street and you don't do anything, that's, I hope if any of us are put in that situation, we do have the courage to stand up and try to put an end to, that kind of harassment. But so tell me, like, so you worked in the corporate America for a little while, and then now you're kind of getting into the startup space. And I've traditionally seen startup space as a very diverse area, and I a place that I think like. So has that been your experience?
I mean, I think it's hard to generalize this about all startups, but I'll tell you the one thing I have learned about startups is that their interpretation of diversity is almost identical to what I found in banking, which is Asians don't count. Like, we are way overrepresented, and so we don't count towards their definition of diversity because there's too many of us, which I think is an assumption that really needs to be challenged. Yeah, I mean, my current company is based out of the UK, and we're not very diverse, but I think that also just has to do with the fact that the company itself is based out of London, and there's, I think in the US at least, like it's more, I feel like the diversity that we're hoping to see is maybe more international diversity than just like all British employees. But yeah, I mean, I think when you talk diversity in startups, right, you can, there's diversity in the types of people you hire, and then there's also diversity in the types of people you promote. And when you look at Asians in tech, what I would want to see is the data around, how many Asians are in your client-facing roles versus like your data and your engineering roles, right? Like, how many of us have a really easy time getting into technical roles, but not the roles that require us to have soft skills, how many, and there's a lot of Asian startup founders and Asian CEOs, but how hard is it for them to get VC funding than a white CEO? And I have a friend who is Asian American, and he started his own company, and he tells me that he feels as an Asian CEO, he has to prove to VCs what he's done for them to even take a chance on him. But he feels like for a white CEO or startup founder, they're judged based on potential. So he feels that there is a gap there, and that is a form of inequality right there, right? If someone, and we all know VC funding is based on fluff, right? Like there's in the beginning stages of a company, I'm sure you know this very well, John T, as like a startup founder, what they're using to assess like a company's valuation and potential is really based on the founders, right? What are they looking at? They're looking at education, they're looking at race, but also potential. And I think as an Asian startup founder, there's definitely barriers there. So yeah, tech, no, not diverse in my opinion. To answer your question.
Fair enough. Let's see how you disrupt this space. Maybe you can. I see a new project on your horizon.
Yeah.
So okay, I noticed that now. After all these attacks, I do see a lot of Asian American actors and actresses coming forward, offering rewards, to, find these people who are kind of like attacking Asian Americans. They've also advertised that Asian, I don't know what I was going to say. So how do you think the media has handled this? And more broadly, how's the Asian American community handled this situation?
So I think what's been interesting is that these crimes have been happening for over a year now. They've literally been happening since we went into lockdown, which was last March. So this is not anything new. It's only become more mainstream recently. So I just want to like point that out. So Asian Americans have been under attack since the beginning of this crisis. So I think the media coverage has gotten better, but I don't think it's still at a place where it's enough. I think it's still, in my opinion, I feel like the only people I really see talking about this are Asian activists like on social media who are very just invested in Asian community issues, but I still don't see this like broader public dialogue happening on it where it's really impelling change. And it's nice to see, all the Fortune 500 companies issuing statements being like, we stand with the Asian community, we stand in the Asian community, but it's like, what are you doing about it? Like I get this is good for your PR, but like, what exactly, like what's happening now, is what I want to know. How the Asian community feels about it, that's a very complicated question. what I've been noticing is that there are Asian Americans who knew that these hate crimes were happening, but they were not very outspoken about it, because I think there was maybe a sense of not feeling like they could, if that makes sense. Especially, when we've never really had this kind of mainstream focus on our community like this, and what's been happening to us. I think there are Asian Americans who genuinely probably needed that kind of validation from, like, Daniel Day Kim saying, I'm going to offer a $25,000 reward, or seeing CNN finally talking about this to be like, oh, okay, now we can talk about it. So I feel like for some Asian Americans, there's been like a very recent awakening, or like a very recent compulsion to finally speak up. And with that also comes, I think, a wrestling for them on realizing that, as successful as they may be, or as as blissful life was for them, they realize, oh shit, I'm Asian, and that means there are consequences. Like, it's almost like I feel like there are certain Asians who are just wrestling with like their Asianness now because of what's happening, so I think that's been an interesting thing to see.
It's interesting, actually, there's a parallel. I have a friend who was Bosnian, and his family had to deal with the whole genocide that happened there. And his father, until almost it was too late, was in denial that he did not see himself as different. Well, we're neighbors, we're friends, we marry each other, why would they attack us, right? And the unfortunate thing was that they were having conversations behind closed doors. The hate was building, the animosity was building, and certain political figures were taking advantage of us, of that situation. Even religious figures were stoking the flames of hatred and animosity. So even though, like you said, the Asian American community in general is like, look, we've worked hard, we've really tried to like be a benefit to this country and create jobs and all that kind of stuff. Why would they hate us? I mean, yeah, why would they? But that's the reality. And now you're right. The community has to think about this. Like, how are we going to react? And it'll be interesting in the coming, months and years to see how that evolves. And I'm curious. I hope this leads to a broader conversation where we do have these kind of talks, even between races. And we were talking about that before, how sometimes the African-American community and the Asian American community, sometimes there's tension between them, right? Mm-hmm. And when in fact,
sometimes it's not sometimes, but yeah. Yeah.
Being a little generous, but I mean, both communities are suffering from hate, and maybe there needs to be a stronger dialogue between the different racial groups and individuals to really understand each other, rather than just kind of like, make assumptions about entire groups based on what some members of that group do and say, and, how much money they make. Right. Yeah. Like you said, you told me before too, you come from a more working class family. People think, oh, Asians are represented, and, they're wealthy, but there are many Asians that aren't wealthy. There are many Asians that are living in poverty. Right.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, that's a very good point. And I think, yeah, there's a lot of work to do on the solidarity front. And I think Asian Americans are probably we're at a point of reckoning right now, where I think we really need to figure ourselves out. Like I said, you have Asian Americans who just very recently I think became more woke to all of this kind of happening. And then there are Asians who have kind of known about this all along, and they've been trying to organize like the community to come together more. And the big issue is just like Asian itself it's not a monolith, right? There's so many ethnic groups that fall under that label, and at the end of the day, it's kind of a fake label, like it's essentially a label white people gave us to be very lazy about a part of geography that they were not very familiar with. So you have like South Asians lumped in there. You even have Pacific Islanders that like fall under that. And if you look at those ethnic countries, they don't see similarities between each other at all. But their descendants come here, and now we all get thrown in under this label, and we have to now figure out what brings us together. And the thing that brings us together is racism. That's it. The only thing that we all have in common is that if someone really hates Asians, they're not going to see a difference between me and the Chinese person, because I'm not Chinese, right? And they would see no difference. So that's the only thing. Like, we don't have this like shared history and culture. We don't have this common narrative that the Black community has here of, you know, coming here as slaves, and, you know, the civil rights movement and all the things that they've collectively gone through, which has formed that narrative of like what it means to be Black in America. Asians in America, we do have some of that history, you know, with like Chinese, you know, Chinese people who came here during the 1800s to build the railroads, but it's still a very fractured community still, and there's a lot of work I think we have to do to figure out who we are before we can even do the hard work of building solidarity with other groups. So
respects. No, that's very nuanced, and I respect that, and I agree. I agree. There are a lot of, you know, difficult conversations in the coming months and years.
Yeah.
On a slightly lighter note, I need your advice.
Mm-hmm.
I've had conversations with Asian Americans that got a bit awkward and very fast. It usually starts when I ask them where they're originally from. So am I being insensitive? Are they being overly sensitive? Is it offensive to even ask?
So, you know, I'm not going to speak for all Asian Americans about whether it's an offensive question. But this is what I would say. Like, there are some Asian Americans who are a lot more patient than I am, and, you know, we'll get asked that question. They're like, I understand. And I'll be like, no, they need to get the question right. Like, that's effed up if they ask that question. So it's not all Asian Americans who I think would find it offensive. However, I do think the implication with a question like that to someone who is of Asian descent, especially if they speak perfect English, like if you met me for the first time and that was the first question, yeah, I'd be pretty offended, because I would just be like, I mean, I speak English, you know, so it's just, I mean, I don't know, maybe that's not, like, maybe I assume people are more intelligent than that. I don't know. But
I think for me, like, you know, you're right. I understand where the frustration comes from, and I'll be perfectly, like, I'll be devil's advocate, right? Which is, you know, usually there's sometimes a connotation that you're not quite American. When somebody asks you that question, they're trying to say like, oh, you're not like me. You're not really American, right? But the problem is, like, I am being insensitive, because like when I ask it, it's usually I'm looking for some common ground, right? Like I said, my roommate freshman year was Korean American, right? He taught me to use chopsticks. He brought me to, like, you know, all the Korean restaurants. He, like, you know, introduced me to K-pop, right? And so, you know, if you're Korean, it's like, okay, we can have those conversations, right? I'm not trying to be like racially insensitive or say somehow you're not really American, but I do understand, right? You know, sometimes people are really genuine. They just want to know and have something to talk about. You know, that's obviously maybe something that there can be a conversation there. But I also understand the flip side, which is, you know, yeah, why do you not think I'm one of you, right? I'm not really American, right? And that can be hurtful.
Or I think maybe I feel like, John T, you're a lot more open-minded than the average white person, just to be quite frank. So I believe you when you tell me you're asking me because you want to find something in common with me. But I think from personal experience, if the question comes from typically a typical American person who's white, it's asked more out of a sense of just fascination of like where I'm really, really from. So just wanted to point that out.
I'll save it for maybe the third or fourth question from now on, just so I don't offend people as much.
Yeah.
So thanks for that. So tell us more, like, what can we do? Like, if somebody's interested in supporting the, you know, Asian American community, and, you know, where should they go? You know, what resources are out there? You know, are there organizations that are really trying to create awareness? Are there organizations that are trying to, like, kind of, you know, support laws that would support the Asian American community at this time? Or, you know, what's there?
Yeah, definitely. So two organizations that I think are doing very important work right now is Stop AAPI Hate. So they are a database that collects information on, you know, self-reported hate crimes against the Asian American community. So they've been really critical in providing data around, you know, how many hate crimes against Asian Americans have been committed in this. You know, I think in 2020 it was 1,900% increase in the number of hate crimes. And these are just self-reported. So you don't even know how many more have been happening. So Stop AAPI Hate. And then there's the Asian American Federation. And they're a great organization in New York City that
Mm.
publishes reports on the, on the Asian American community in New York. Like they look at poverty levels, they look at education levels, and they just provide really in-depth reporting around the demographics of the Asian American community in New York City and what their needs are. And they organized the rally that happened last Saturday in Lower Manhattan, which was in response to like all the hate crimes that were happening. So they've also been a key player in all of this. I think as an individual, what you can do, if you're on social media, I would really, just see who you follow, see what's on your feed. Do you follow other Asian Americans? Do you know any Asian Americans who have been speaking out about this issue? Like they're out there. I would say majority of them really exist on social media, to be honest, because mainstream media won't give us a voice. So if you really genuinely want to learn more, try to follow those pages, and I can send you some handles too, if that's something you want to share with your viewers, but diversify your feed. If talk to an Asian American, ask them how they feel about everything that's going on. If they don't want to talk about it, that's fine too, but some of them may be feeling kind of scared right now or feeling really stressed out because of all the things that you're hearing about in the news. Just talk to them and ask how they feel, and ask them to share, their story with you. It's as simple as that,
I love that. I love that. And I think, I remember after 9/11, there were a lot of like Muslim, especially Muslim women who wear the headscarf who, people would come up to them. It's like, look, if anybody bothers you, let me know. I'm here, I'm here for you. Right. And I think, it's appreciated. It's appreciated. Right. I mean, like you said, you guys are having those conversations. Should I even go on public transportation? Should I be walking down the street by myself? What might happen? So I think that kind of support on a one-to-one basis is powerful. So I will, my wife is sharing those links. I'll share all the other links that, kind of weren't shared right now, afterwards. And we're going to come to the fun part, which is where we share a snack. So, Andrew shared, the applets and cotlets, if I'm not mistaken, snack, right? Do you have that?
Right here. Yes. Thank you for sending this to me.
So there you go, Andrew. Thank you. And now let's see what you think of it. You have to taste it and you have to give us your honest opinion about what you think.
Okay. So sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, that's okay. And hopefully, as you're opening it, hopefully you can respond, because I suspect they're very sticky.
Yeah. So the minute I saw this, I immediately thought they looked like Turkish delights.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm gonna.
That's what he was saying. Yeah. Yeah. He shared the story, which was like, I believe it was Eastern European like farmers in Washington area. They had like this excess of, apples, and they're like, okay, what can we turn them into? And they have that tradition, it's kind of like an Eastern European interpretation of the Turkish delight. Yeah. In Washington. So
these are amazing.
okay, awesome.
Wow. These are delicious. Did you get to try one?
I haven't tried it yet. Actually, I was gonna bring it here, and I didn't have a chance. But I'll try it afterwards.
Yeah. No, this is incredible. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Thank you, Andrew. This is amazing.
He loves it because he grew up like in Washington State, and he used to eat this. And now I think every time they pass the outlet, they'd always stop by and grab this snack on the road. So it's kind of something personal for him as well.
Is this something you can get on Amazon? I'm assuming, or
yep, you can get it on Amazon. So
I'm definitely
we need to get a cut of this. We got to talk to Amazon and get like the affiliate program going.
Seriously, yeah. No, this is incredible. This is amazing. Awesome. Yeah.
So, and what are you going to share with the next guest then?
Yeah. So my recommendation, by the way, I think this is such a cool idea for the podcast. But so these are like, I guess they're squid flavored chips. These were my favorite growing up as a kid. If you go to like an H Mart or a Korean grocery store, there's usually like a snack aisle with just tons of different chip bags. A lot of them are seafood flavored, but this happens to be my personal favorite. Yeah, they're awesome. I hope the next person you send this to doesn't dislike seafood, but
I know it's hit or miss. This one's I can't guarantee, because my wife also introduced me to the shrimp crackers and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
and I'm an inland guy, unfortunately. So seafood. Yeah, so we'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, I just, be open-minded, but
Yeah, my kids love
anyway.
it. My kids will eat like, seaweed, all these like shrimp crackers, seafood flavored things. They love it. So
Yeah.
I hope the next one likes it. No, and that was very generous of you sharing something personal. Thank you very much. Like I said, I'm going to share all the links, and thank you again for joining us, for sharing your experiences. Really appreciate it. And best of luck. We're here to support you too. If anything happens, you want to share news about, things going on in the Asian community, things that, organizations you think that need some extra support, send the link my way. I'll be happy to share it as well. So,
Will do.
all right.
Thank you, Shanti, for this. Appreciate you creating this space. So thank
Oh,
you.
no, thank
Yeah.
you. All right. Have a good
Yeah.
day. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.